Starting today, we are going through all of the wars waged by Russia and their predecessors, all the way from the modern day back to the Grand Duchy of Muscovy, seeing how many wars Russia fought, won and lost. To ensure that I can give each of the 155 at least some solid coverage, this video will be divided up into 4 parts: Moscow, Tsardom, Empire and Modern, with the other 3 episodes releasing in the following weeks. To dive right in, the creation of Muscovy can be traced back to Daniel of Moscow in a true rags to riches story. Russia was under the rule of the Mongols, and young Daniel found himself in control over the city-state of Moscow, a relatively insignificant city, at least for now. The first conflict Moscow engaged in was the Vladimir Suzdal War of Succession, a war about the future of Vladimir Suzdal, one of the most important Russian states of the time. Dmitry of Pereyaslav, the candidate that Daniel supported, would lose the conflict and Moscow would be raided during this war. The next conflict would be a struggle over control of Pereyaslav-Zaleski. A coalition of Moscow and Tver would fight the Lord of Vladimir over the region, and despite Moscow, again, being sacked, Moscow would secure control over the region. Over the next couple of centuries, Moscow and Tver would start engaging in a series of conflicts about who is the most powerful Rus lord. This first conflict would see Vladimir and Tver rise up against Mongol rule, with Moscow actively supporting the Mongols. As a result of this war, Vladimir would be completely broken up and Moscow's borders would be readjusted. In the next couple of decades, the Golden Horde, Muscovy's overlords, began to decline and face internal struggle. In the west of their empire, the Golden Horde would come into conflict with the rising Lithuanians, who would annex many former Rus tributaries of the Horde. As part of Lithuania's expansion, Lithuania also launched raids against Muscovy, supported by Tver, but the Lithuanians would fail to break Moscow. But the Golden Horde, still Muscovy's overlord, was not feeling very well, entering their Great Troubles, a period of succession crisis in the Horde. During this period, the Muscovites would launch a raid against the Volga Bulgarians, forcing them to pay reparations. During this same period, a coalition faced off against the Golden Horde, hoping to achieve independence, being loosely supported by the Muscovites too. But the Russian forces, in true Russian fashion, got drunk and were crushed. This next war would be absolutely huge for Muscovy's position. The Horde would launch a punitive expedition into Rus lands to punish the Russians for their earlier revolt. Dmitry of Muscovy would manage to defeat the Golden Horde in the first serious victory by the Rus over the Horde. But this would only anger the Horde more, and Mamai, who had recently managed to reunify most of the Golden Horde, began another raid to re-establish Horde control over Rus lands. The Rus would unify their armies under Moscow's control, and the Russians would manage to hold off the Horde invasion. This victory would cement Moscow's place as one of the most important Rus principalities. Sorry for the quick interruption, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To be notified about the 2 videos I release every single week, consider doing so and maybe like and subscribe too. Thank you. For a while, the Rus acted happy and independently, but don't be fooled. This dude, Tokamesh, the new Golden Horde Khan, was not about to let this slide. He rode up to Moscow and sacked the city, re-establishing the Rus' tributary relation to the Horde. It's now 2 decades later and Lithuania is right on the Muscovite border. This would lead to the 2 states clashing over Lithuania's expansion. This first war would end inconclusively, with both states gaining and losing some land. Skipping over another 2 peaceful decades, we have Uluch Muhammad's campaign. The leader of the newly independent Kazan Khanate invaded Muscovy while the Muscovite civil war was ongoing. Uluch would manage to capture Vasily II, one of the contenders for the Muscovite throne, turning Vasily into his vassal. The larger Muscovite civil war would see the pretender capture Moscow, but Vasily re-establishing control over his entire principality. From here, Moscow would really start to flex their muscle against just about everyone, starting with the Kasim War. 3 Muscovite raids would go into Kazan, and by the end of the conflict, the Muscovites would manage to force the Kazans to release all ethnic Christian Rus enslaved over the past 4 decades. But far more importantly, Ivan III of Muscovy had set his sights north, to the Novgorod Republic. In Moscow's biggest conquest yet, they had defeated the Novgorodians in the Battle of Shalon. 7 years later, the Muscovites would make their annexation of the entire region official. Back south, the Grand Duke went back to Kazan, where the Muscovites would defeat the Kazan Khan and replace him with the Khan's half-brother. thereby turning Kazan into a Muscovite puppet as Ivan III pronounced himself Lord of Volga, Bulgaria. Now for most of this video, I have shown Muscovy in green and the Rus tributaries to the Golden Horde in light yellow. Despite this, even while Muscovy is as big as it is now, they would remain an official tributary to the Horde. That is, until now. In what is known as the Great Stand on the Ugra River, the armies of Moscow and the Golden Horde stared at each other for a while, until the Horde armies simply went home. This war is generally considered as the moment where Tatar rule over the Rus, established by the Mongol conquest, finally ended. Now throughout all of this time, the city of Tver still existed, and it was about time that stopped being true. In the brief capture of Tver, the final other previously significant East Slavic state had been absorbed into Muscovy. Which means Muscovy now has to look outside for new enemies. First, we have the First Muscovite-Lithuanian War. Never mind those other Muscovite-Lithuanian wars discussed so far, they don't count, this is the first. With Muscovy on the rise, Ivan III has begun styling himself as the successor to the Roman emperors of Byzantium. With this, Ivan has also claimed to be the defender of the entire Orthodox Church, and much of Lithuania's territory was, in fact, Orthodox. Ivan also claimed to be the successor to the Kievan Rus, which, similarly, encompassed much of Lithuania's territory. This tension would cause many wars in the future. This first war though isn't actually that interesting. There was some skirmishing, but to prevent the war from escalating, Lithuania simply ceded some territory to Muscovy. Meanwhile in the north, the Muscovites and the Swedes had their very first scuffle. Very little happened and no land changed hands. But Ivan sought another conflict with Lithuania, as Lithuania's allies of Poland and Hungary were busy fighting a war with the Ottomans. Moscow's initial successes were huge, and Lithuania was devastated. The entrance of the Livonian Order into the war would allow Lithuania to somewhat stabilize by putting counter-pressure in the north, but that didn't save Lithuania from a massive loss of land. Then, some Muscovite merchants were looted by the Kazan Khan. Russia sent an army to punish them, but it was defeated. To restore peace and prevent another Muscovite expedition, Kazan gave up on their prisoners and the war was over. Back on the western border, both Poland and Lithuania would now be united under the same ruler. Emboldened, the Poles declared war on Muscovy in hopes of reclaiming Lithuania's lost land, but after another short war, neither side achieved victory and the war just kind of ended. Pretty much immediately after, another war erupted, which on paper looks quite unfavorable to the Muscovites. Still, somehow, Moscow actually managed to achieve a very slight victory, gaining the city of Smolensk from the war. Then, upon the death of the Russian Duke, Ivan, soon to be terrible, IV, took charge of the state. But for now, he was Ivan the Toddler at only 3 years of age. In hopes that this would weaken Moscow, Poland and Lithuania again started a war with Moscow. Shockingly though, the Muscovites actually went on the offensive, but Lithuania would manage to recover and the war ended inconclusively. And this would be the final war in the era of the Grand Duchy of Muscovy. In terms of the score sheet, Moscow won 54% of their wars, lost 21% and drew 25%. When converting this to a war score, where nations get 3 points for a victory, 1 point for a draw and 0 points for a loss, Moscow averages out at a 1.9. We can compare that to other nations done so far, which right now is only the US, giving us the US at number 1 with a score of 2.46, meaning Muscovy, our second nation covered so far, also reaches second place, at least for now. Because next episode, releasing next week, we will see Ivan IV end the era of Muscovy, starting the era of the Tsardom of Russia. This will be a very exciting period for Russia, seeing by far their greatest expansion. So be sure to subscribe to join me next week in seeing where the Tsardom lands on our slowly expanding score sheet. But that's where I'll end this video. Thank you all for watching, consider leaving a like and a comment to support the content, and subscribe for 2 more videos every single week. To continue watching, click on one of the 2 videos on screen now. Again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.